Department and here to talk about the USF Kenya Conservation and Sustainable Development Field School that we hope to run every May and June in Kenya. Um, so I'll be telling you much more here about the program. I am personally a broadly trained cultural and linguistic anthropologist. I've been working in East Africa for about 25 years. I am a fluent Swahili speaker. That is the main language other than English that we'll hear being used on the ground while we're in Kenya, although there are a number of different languages that we'll hear. I've done a lot of work also in Tampa, in New Hampshire, where I'm originally from. And so there are a lot of different interests that I have, but many of them will come together during the field school. I'm only one of three program leaders, so I'm the USF point person, but my two co-directors are Dr. Nancy Moinde and Dr. Stan Kivai. They are both Kenyan anthropologists and primatologists, meaning that they are experts on monkeys and in Nancy's case, baboons. But they also work a lot on conservation issues in Kenya. They both work with the Kenyan Institute for Primate Research, which is our main partner in Kenya. And Stan himself is also, they call him climate change on the ground. He is the director for climate change in Makueni County, and he's just sort of a big person in that realm. So those are the people that will be running this, and we've been putting this together now for quite a long time, and we've been working together for well over 10 years, the three of us. A couple things about the academic requirements. This is open to really any field or any students from any background. We've had grad students and undergrad students, and we have options for courses that you can take at the grad or undergrad level. The primary courses, if you don't want to do independent study credit, which is an option, are environmental anthropology and methods in cultural research. So we do have quite a bit of theoretical discussion, just sort of broadly speaking, around environmental anthropology, basically around human and nature interaction. And then in the methods of cultural research, we're actually going to be doing quite a bit of research. Students will have their own final projects, and we'll be facilitating that. And that's a big part of that methods in cultural research class. So there are going to be course readings and discussions regularly, although we also have a number of course meetings before we actually head out to Kenya. That's to both get to know each other, and it's also a way to front load a lot of the reading and a lot of the more academic discussion, because when we're actually in Kenya, it's kind of like a sprint. We're really busy, we're doing a lot, and we're going to be out on the ground doing things pretty much every day. There's pretty much always a daily excursion, as well as a lecture. In this picture, this is actually us visiting the African Sand Dams Project, which is a big engineering project right now in dealing with water issues. And so this was actually, we had a lecture from the man, he's actually the one in the striped shirt there, who's the director of the African Sand Dams Project. And then he took us out to show us one of the sand dams. And so that's what you're seeing here. We also have a policy think tank project. This is another big part of the last week of the program, where we break students into groups and have them come up with recommendations for policy. That's actually really fun. This is one of the more fun events that we do, where we get to really debate and discuss some of the policy that's taking place. And then again, as I said, students will do final projects, and that's really open to the students, especially for students coming in from their own fields. So we had a student who was coming in last year from engineering, was able to do a project very specifically on engineering. We had students, though, that did projects on everything from, Kenyan perceptions of corruption to Kenyan recycling and reuse of materials, people looking at language and identity, and two students who looked at schools and education. So we really are going to work with you as well to make sure that you can do a project or get the kind of access that you're looking for. So in terms of the itinerary and schedule, it does start very soon after the end of the spring semester, and that's really kind of on purpose to just keep people in the flow. I think it worked really well this past summer. It also gives people a lot of the rest of the summer to travel, and you do usually fly through Europe when you're going to Kenya. And so it allows people opportunities to stay in Europe for a while after the program. So we had two students actually who did that this past summer, and ended up traveling around Europe for quite a bit after the program. But you'll be arriving in Nairobi. We will then pick you up from the airport, and we'll coordinate together the flights. So this past summer, I think there were like 3 main flights, and we were all kind of broken up onto those flights. But we'll all know each other's flights and how we're flying through. And we will be there again to pick everyone up from the airport in Nairobi. And then once you're in our care, It's pretty much all inclusive in the sense that your meals, your lodging, everything is pretty much covered, and we'll be taking good care of you. So we'll start in Nairobi. We'll get to see the National Museum. We'll get to see the Institute of Primate Research, a bunch of things around the city. We'll get to go do some shopping. So for many people, you want to pack light, and you can buy pretty much everything you need. Things like toothpaste and, basic food, snacks, things like that. You can buy a lot of that in Nairobi, and so we'll be able to take care of that. And people are always, forgetting things or they need things that they, wish they'd brought. And we can cover all of that when we're in Nairobi. After a day, it says a few days. It'll probably be 2 days. It does somewhat depend on whether or not there are delays in the flights. Many flights this past summer were delayed for a day, and so that kind of, changed things. But in any case, we then go down to Kimana, and I'll show you on a map where Kimana is. It's right down under Kilimanjaro on the border of Tanzania, and we'll stay there for about 10 days at the Kenya Field Studies grounds. It's a really nice, it's sort of a campgrounds, but we're not going to be camping. We're going to be indoors in cabins. And then we're going to move around to Kibwezi, which is over in Makwini County. And we'll be staying in a place called Kambua Guest House for 10 days, around 10 days. And again, both places will be doing daily excursions. And in a way, we'll be doing a real comparison between what you'll find in Kimana, which is a very Maasai area, and then in Kibwezi, which is a very Kamba area. So there's this ethnic comparison as well. Free time is always something that comes up, so I have it down there. We're going to try to build in as much free time as possible, but again, we're so busy. There is so much happening. There is not a huge amount of free time. I think a lot of the free time is spent driving around, going places because we will be traveling quite a bit. We're just after the rainy season, so the roads can be a little torn up. This past year was really pretty bad. They had the record rains. Hopefully in the future that won't be as big an issue. But we do have some free time. We were able to get to the swimming pool actually, I think 3 times this past summer to give people a real, a break and just an opportunity. And we'll be around hotels and things. And so if you're looking for your nice modern accommodations, we'll find those for you. So just to show you on a map, you're going to be flying into Nairobi here. This is the Indian Ocean down here. And then we will, after spending just like a day or two in Nairobi, we're going to go straight down this way. It's actually this highway, and then it cuts down like this. And we're going to end up down here in the town. It's called Kimana, which is basically here. It's actually very close. This is Amboseli National Park. And then this is Kilimanjaro. And this is True Blue Hills National Park. And then when we go from Kimana to Kibwezi, we're going to drive up and around. Then Kibwezi is over here. So in both of these counties, Kajiado County and Makwini County, they're surrounded on 3 sides by national park. And basically what we're looking at is that the animals, there's too many animals for the park. And when we were there this past summer, because it was after the rainy season, most of the animals were not actually in the parks. They had left the parks. And so what that means is that you just have animals crossing right across people's properties. So on both sides that we'll be looking at, what's been happening is the formation of a lot of community conservations, where the community members will form these big community conservation groups where they can allow animals to cross, but they can also set up things like fencing for their farms and try to come up with some shared use. However, all of these conservancies are doing it differently. So we'll be meeting with several of these conservancies just to see the different models and the different ways that they're trying to deal with these issues. This is Kilimanjaro. This is actually from the KFS campground where we'll be in Kimana. We're going to be right under Kilimanjaro, which is the highest mountain in Africa. And that is a glacier on the top of the mountain, and it's melting rapidly. So one of the really interesting things happening in this area is that all of that water coming off the top of Kilimanjaro is actually causing a lot of flooding and new lakes to emerge. So it's really kind of interesting because in most places you're dealing with drought. But under Kilimanjaro, we've got all of this glacial water coming down. The problem is in about 20 years, that glacier will be gone and then there will be no water. So these are some of the big concerns. This is another map that just kind of shows you where we'll be. Nairobi would be up here, just kind of off the map, but this is the greater ecosystem we're looking at. And what you're seeing here, like Kuku and Rombo, Kamungi, these are all places we're going to go, but these are the community conservancies that are built up between the parks. And so these are areas where people are living and they're coming up with shared uses with both wildlife and people who are trying to work on conservation issues. This is one of the things, this is like in Birikani Ranch. That's actually up right here, this big ranch. So this is one of the ranches that we'll go to. It's one of the community conservancies. And this is the head ranger for that ranch. And what they're showing us here is their live monitoring system for if there's any incidents, because that's one of the big things that happens. The big issue is actually hyenas eating people's sheep. Sometimes goats as well, and sometimes lions eating things, but it's mostly hyenas eating sheep. So that kind of human wildlife contact and conflict is a real issue, and they have a whole system of rangers on the ground who monitor those things. So we'll get to see a lot of that. The big issues, though, that we're looking at, and I've already mentioned a couple of these, are again the governance of these community conservancies, which are really kind of new, and so that's really interesting just to see how these conservancies are emerging. Then you've got water. Water is really the big issue, and it comes up everywhere because they're dealing with drought, like I said, in most places, although under Kilimanjaro, now they're dealing with, all of this water coming down. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on here. And there's all types of gender, public health, engineering issues related to water. This is just a really big one on everybody's mind. And then the other one I've mentioned already is human wildlife conflict. So there is a good amount of human wildlife conflict now just because people are coming into contact and living very closely with wildlife. At the same time, that's not new. And these areas have long, contained these populations of people and these populations of animals. And so another thing we're really looking at is, indigenous knowledge and history. Like what can we actually learn from the past in terms of how people were living with these animals in these same areas? So one of the things we're also looking at is sustainable agriculture. So many of the community groups on the ground are experimenting with all kinds of new plants and new growing techniques, some of which are actually not new. They're old. They're bringing back old techniques. And what you see here on the left are actually test plots for different types of techniques for water retention specifically. And on the right side, this is a tree nursery. So tree nurseries are also a really big deal in terms of trying to get people to plant trees, but not just any trees. These are actually cashews and mangoes. So, planting things for not just helping the environment, but also producing a cash crop that people can sell. We will be going on a number of safaris. Of interest, we actually see more animals, I think, outside the parks than in the parks, but we will be going on a couple of safaris. This is a picture from Sava West National Park from this last summer. And if you see all this black rock, this is actually a recent lava flow. It's called the Shaitani lava flow. But we're going to be on a really incredible landscape, really, really interesting place. And we have really quite a good staff. And actually, and I'm just noticing in this picture, this is Stephen Yaga. He's an old friend of mine. He's actually the head ranger. He actually trains all the rangers now for Kenya Wildlife Service. This is my co-director, Nancy. This is Moses. He's one of our drivers. So we have a number of drivers that are from the Kenyan Institute for Primate Research. Joyce was one of our Kenyan students, and we're hoping to have a number of Kenyan students on the program this next summer. In fact, I'm getting inundated with applications from Kenyan students who want to go on the program. So there's a lot of excursions, a lot of amazing landscapes. You'll see a lot of wildlife. We ended up seeing quite a lot of elephants. We'll talk about elephants. Kenyans don't necessarily like elephants very much. They're really kind of big and dangerous. So we'll get to hear a lot about these different animals and how people are living with them. I have this picture not just to show the landscape, but this is actually where we ate lunch one day. And this is also something just to be aware of, in the mornings in terms of how the program works. We get up, we have cooks. So the cooks can be very accommodating to dietary issues. And we usually have, a nice big breakfast. Lunch, though, is often, a packed lunch that we'll have on the road. And, there are times where we'll just find a nice spot to pull over and to eat lunch. And so that's just, so everybody to know that is a part of the daily routine. And then for dinner, usually we'll either go out to a restaurant or something, and we'll cover that. That's covered by the program costs. We did that a number of times to get some good roasted goat. We'll do a goat roast for sure. We'll have some Maasai guys come in, and I actually bought the goat this past summer, and it was expensive. We had a huge goat. So the students get to see the whole goat roast process. So we'll do a couple of cool things like that. But otherwise, we'll be eating dinners then back, and our cooks will cook up all kinds of food, Kenyan food mostly. But it's mostly, all natural, good foods. Just for the housing information, you can look up all these places on Google Maps. It's actually called the Wildebeest Eco Lodge, if you're looking up wildebeest, but that's where we'll stay in Nairobi. It's a really nice spot right on the outside of the city in a very safe place. It's actually very expensive, but it's a really great place to be at the very end and at the very beginning of the program when people are kind of trying to acclimate. It's got a really nice little restaurant inside of it, and it's a nice spot. Then again, we'll be in Kimana and Kibwezi, and we'll be at the Kenya Field Studies Campground, and we'll be at Kambua Guest House. And these are both places we're not going to be camping. At Kambua, everyone gets their own room. At both places, there's hot water. You know, so people will be fine. Laundry, I should mention, I think a lot of students just hand washed. I personally just hand wash my clothes. Usually, we'll have everything you need to do that. We also do have some people who will be there that we can hire to do laundry. So some of the times, you'll have somebody who you can hire to do laundry. So that's just one thing to keep in mind is that you may want to learn how to hand wash clothes. Although if you're really against that, everywhere we're staying, there's probably somebody you can hire really cheaply to just, do your laundry for you. Um, Communication while abroad, Wi-Fi and internet is really pretty good in Kenya. My old research was actually all on the internet and development of internet infrastructure in Kenya, and they are really like they were at the top in Africa. I actually think from this past summer that the network has gotten worse because so many more people are using it. But Kenya generally has really good, really reliable network. It's a little tough when you're in the rural areas, when you're in the national parks. That can, be a little bit of a problem. But where we'll be staying, we'll have Wi-Fi there, but also you have good access to internet. So we'll all be on WhatsApp pretty regularly, and we'll have a big group, with Stan and Nancy will be on there, the Kenyan staff will be on there, so everybody will be able to communicate, and that's usually the go-to, is using WhatsApp. And people were able to video call with back home, all of that is pretty standard. It's easy to keep in touch with folks back home. So I was going to say, most people did not get a Kenyan number. You can buy a SIM card in Kenya and get your own Kenyan number. I think most of us, I ended up paying, I think, $50 just for an international plan to use my phone, my US number overseas. And that's usually more helpful because then you can communicate while you're traveling. You just get that number shifted over to international. We can help students with any of that, any of those issues too. Those are kind of like last minute kind of things, getting those figured out in the weeks before we depart. While we're abroad, again, I already kind of mentioned this, but all meals are covered. I think this is really important when you're comparing this program to a lot of other programs, especially some of the programs in Europe where students are expected to actually spend a lot of their own money buying food. Like there's a lot more free meals. We cover all your meals. So there are times where the students were like, I want to go find pizza. They did find a pizza place in Kibwezi, and they went and got pizza and ice cream a lot because they missed pizza and ice cream. And so you're always free to do that. But we were talking about this before, and I think it would actually be hard for students to find a way to spend more than a couple $100. And that's going to be mostly on souvenirs, maybe, on some pizza. But generally, especially compared to the US, Kenya's pretty cheap. And so we will have, I mean, it's not, you won't find it expensive, so we'll have lots and lots of food. We will have cooks. We actually have several meetings to get feedback from the students during the program on the food and how it's going, so that's all sort of a process. But you may want to go off on your own and get some food. But again, we'll pretty much have things covered. It's very open to vegans, to vegetarians. When I first went to Kenya, I was actually a vegetarian myself. It's very easy to be a vegetarian in Kenya. Again, lots and lots of fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and all that's going to go into the cooking. If you like goat, we'll have a lot of goat as well. In terms of the budget and the money, again, there's not a lot of personal spending that you'll be doing. But for that personal spending, and I think I think there are a lot of students who just didn't have money for much of the time we were there because they didn't even go to the ATM and bother getting money out, like because they didn't really need money. But the easiest thing is just to go to ATM. So in Kibwezi, Kimana, definitely in Nairobi, you'll find ATMs, and we'll usually just go as a group, and everybody can just pull out a little bit of money. That's the easiest way to do it, and it's the best exchange rate, is just to use your US debit card in one of the ATMs overseas. It's safe. I do it all the time. And then you'll just get some cash. It's the Kenya shilling. Credit cards also work really well. So especially if you're at the airports, but at the malls in Nairobi and really most like formal shops in Kenya, you can use a credit card, and that'll also give you a good exchange rate. And it's an easy way to just pay for something. Cash, of course, though, is always very helpful. This is a new one that I just put in here because it came up a lot in questioning in the past, but the health and vaccine issue. I do recommend that students, if they have a good, healthcare, talk to a doctor or a travel nurse and get their recommendations. They'll pull up the recommendations for Kenya. It's going to start with yellow fever, and I would recommend that everybody get your yellow fever shot. You can do that through student health here at USF. It's not very expensive. And what The advantage to getting your yellow fever shot is you also get your yellow World Health Organization vaccine card. So that gets stamped with your yellow fever stamp. And then you can just keep that in your passport and travel with that. And that's good for life. And you can add your other vaccines on there. So I really do recommend people get the yellow fever shot. I don't think any of the students this past summer had theirs checked. So to be honest, if you're flying into Kenya from Europe, they're not really even going to check this. It might be even more coming into the US, coming back, that they might even be interested to know, like, did you get your vaccine? At the same time, I think to be safe, everybody should just go ahead and get that. Otherwise, though, definitely talk to us if you take any medication, any prescription medication, something like that. If you're concerned about that, there's a system for talking actually to USF, and they can give you advice on that. But in terms of vaccines, I personally have gotten pretty much all of the vaccines that could possibly be recommended for Kenya, including rabies and cholera. And, none of that is necessary, though. I wouldn't highly recommend any of those. I would make sure that your basic boosters, your COVID shots and your MMRs, kind of your basics, those are always really good to have. Um, but otherwise, there aren't any really any that you'd need. A lot of students did come with malaria medication because they were advised to get it and it's covered by their insurance, so they brought it anyway. Where we will be is not in a malarial zone. And so you really won't need to take malaria medication. It's only really down on the coast if any of us go down to the coast. Now, if you want to stay after the program, like that's what I will be doing when the program ends. I will be going to the coast. And this past summer, some students actually went down to the coast with us after the program. In that case, you might want to have some malaria medication with you. So it might be, worth bringing if you want to leave a lot of options open and you want to travel around a bit after the program. But in terms of where we will be, it's really not necessary. It gets down into the 60s at night, which is too cold for the mosquitoes that are going to carry malaria. So, in terms of the weather, actually, where we'll be, it's kind of dry. It's not real humid, right? We're dealing with a lot of drought issues. It is just south of the equator, so the sun is kind of brutal. So bring your sunscreen and your big hats. We will try to stay in the shade. Actually, that's the key. Is we just try to keep everybody in the shade as much as possible. You look at our pictures; we're all hiding in the shade, but that's just fairly standard. Kenyans are the same way, especially during the day. But otherwise, it gets kind of cool at night. It might be up in the high 80s, low 90s during the day. But for somebody from Tampa, it's not bad. It was funny this past summer, Kenyans were all like, "Oh, you must think it's so hot here." And all the students were like, "Actually, it's cold compared to Tampa." So that is something to keep in mind. In fact, actually, just on that note, I think everybody benefited. I think I told everybody, like, bring a hooded sweatshirt or bring a little jacket because every night it's going to be chilly. Just to give you an idea of what it's like. Okay, so the program costs and what it includes. Again, it's pretty much all inclusive. So you're paying the program fee, but you're getting your accommodation, your cultural events, all of your safaris, your meals. It says most meals, but basically all meals. I mean, you may want to get a couple of your own. Emergency support, medical evac, all of this is covered. You will pay for then also for tuition and for your flight, and we can help you with again figuring out the flight. As far as now to commit to the program, you need to just put down a $500 deposit with the Education Abroad office. It's also a really good time to look for scholarship opportunities and other opportunities for funding. I think financial aid can cover much of what is involved in the program. There's also a pre-departure Canvas orientation. And so here are a couple of resources that might be of use. I would say financial aid, if that's something that you want to look into, because they have access to other grants and scholarships that you can apply for. But there's a number of different resources here that you can find useful if you have more questions. I think maybe more importantly, if you have any real questions, you can always contact me at dmahoney1@usf.edu. I'm always happy to answer questions and meet up with anyone to talk more about the program or even about Kenya if you're interested in doing something in Kenya in the future. Let me know. Thanks.